artists.
Well, Waleed Rod's and the Atlas Group, the work that they've kind of come up with, or even in this
well, I mean, Waleed is in the show, yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, this gets to the archive as well, or the sort of, I guess, enforced archive in a way. It's sort of a shaping of an archive that's not drawn necessarily from, the direct records. And I find that quite an interesting method of, for lack of better terms, appropriation, and especially given the context, the heavy context of conflict and war. I suppose there are some people that would take the view that having this license as an artist to practice within this trajectory is somehow morally, the compass of morality can kind of switch back and forth as an artistic practice. I don't personally feel that way. I think it's actually enabling our grander sense of cultural attachment to these things. Is there any, have you had responses that have talked about this at all? Have you had any condemning responses so far to this?
No. I mean, the responses to the show have been overwhelmingly positive. I think, in the first reviews of the show, some people said, as you mentioned, that maybe there weren't as many people as there might have been. But this is and also that the relationship to photojournalism is super interesting, because in fact we deliberately didn't want to make a show that could have been at the Imperial War Museum, or that could have been built out of an American photographic collection. And there's an amazing show on war and photography that was curated out of Houston, which was this sort of 500 or 600 photographs of war from throughout history and so on. This isn't really the kind of thing that an art museum should be doing. It's a great exhibition, but it's not necessarily, that's not Tate's role. And I think the role of Tate in this instance is to show how artists and photographers who are working in very complex and self-reflexive and self-critical ways, how they are engaging with the subject. And I think we're not saying you can't, and in fact it's really important that's why you have Don McCullin and Susan Meiselas and Jim Goldberg and some of these really important people associated with documentary practice, is that their work is really complex and nuanced and thoughtful and reflective. And I think there's a real space for that kind of thing. There's a real appetite for that kind of thing. And I think as long as a show like this is sufficiently varied and sufficiently broad in its inclusion of different approaches, I think that's what's really important. But really, in terms of criticism, I mean, we really haven't. Maybe if I say this, it will generate avalanches of criticism. But we really haven't had a sort of outpouring of why aren't there loads of pictures of London being bombed, or why is there so much about Japan. I think it's interesting that we put forward examples that are in some cases not so well known, and the Japanese example is very, very important. I think that it's more relevant for us to show things that haven't been shown before, to see the map in its entirety for the first time. It's never been shown ever anywhere, not even in Japan. I think this is an important thing to try and do. So as an art exhibition, it should work on that level